I'm Traci Austin, your host of the People Strategy Podcast. This show provides interviews with organizational leaders and ongoing coaching experiences that highlight elevating people in organizations through a people strategy roadmap.
Hi, I'm Chad Franzen from Rise 25. Today, I get to be the host of the People Strategy Podcast, where we dive into the latest trends and best practices in talent management and organizational development. This episode is brought to you by Elevated Talent Consulting, a leading provider of comprehensive talent management solutions. Elevated Talent Consulting was founded on a belief that every individual has a right and a choice to be fulfilled in their work. As leaders, we have an obligation to create the space for ourselves and team members to thrive. Creating that space often fails even with the best of intentions, resulting in employee disengagement and missing business outcomes. As you'll hear from Traci, she uses her coaching, consulting, and training experience to serve organizations through the Team Retention Program. Discover how they can transform your workplace at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. Traci Austin is a certified coach and HR professional with over 2 decades of experience bridging the gap between the C-suite and HR leaders in aligning the business strategy to the business results. She is focused on partnering with leaders at all levels to create fulfilling work. This is done by focusing on 4 levers of engagement: fit to role, leadership, team, and cultural alignment to the strategies and core values to meet the business outcomes. She is the chief strategy consultant and owner of Elevated Talent Consulting, a certified women-owned business that partners with leaders in the mid-level manager roles and HR professionals to bridge the gap with both their team and executive team in exceeding performance expectations while being fulfilled in their work. Traci, thanks so much for having me once again today. How are you?
Thank you, Chad. Every time you read that, I'm like, wow, that's way too long. We need to shorten that thing.
Maybe we'll work on that next time.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we chat today, we get to talk about performance management today, right? And I always love to start this conversation with, is Performance Review Day anyone's favorite day of the year? And the answer is?
Perhaps not.
Exactly, right? So it's like, what exactly are we doing with performance management and why are we doing it? And with that, I want to give a shout out today to a previous guest, Drew Fortin, who had been on our show. And I met Drew through Predictive Index. And in the podcast that Drew and I did together, we talked about a lot about accountability and strategy and merging organizational values into what we're doing inside the organization and using artificial intelligence for that. And why that's important in performance management is because how do we connect with our people to ensure that they're actually in the right role and want to do the work to be engaged in it?
Okay, awesome. Well, we'll encourage people to check that one out. So performance management, I hear that term as an employee and I'm thinking it's just kind of like a drag.
You're judging me, right?
It gets kind of a bad rap, along with accountability. So how do those things kind of go hand in hand to support the team and employees to create results outlined for the business?
Yeah, absolutely. So here's the deal. We all, want to know that we're winning and what we're doing. And a key part of that is that we have clarity in what those key expectations are. With every employee, as we've been talking about previously, it's all about a relationship. So, performance management is one of those where, it became this process that became super complicated and almost like you have to do it annually because there's a compliance component to it. And we have to prove as to why we're going to give you more money or not, and why we're going to promote you or not, right? So it's like the original intention that was there isn't always the thing that's motivating. And so when we look at performance management processes, we're really looking at what is that relationship and how do we put some structure to it that allows everybody on the team to truly know what winning looks like and tie that into what is important to them personally and professionally, along with what's important to the organization. Because if those things aren't aligned, you're either in the wrong role or in the wrong organization. So that's a lot of how those two things go hand in hand.
So the general purpose of an annual review is what?
Well, I think the original purpose of that annual review, as someone who's grown up in HR for, 20 plus years, is it was a compliance piece. And then the other side of it was, hey, we want folks to know where they stand. Well, doing that once a year doesn't work because we don't have the ability to make any changes when that feedback happens once a year. And no one likes surprises, especially when it is very specifically tied into compensation or promotion opportunities. And, the key, I think, kind of rub or tug of war comes in with how do we get the documentation around what's happening? How do we truly measure performance and not just bud and see? Like this, a lot of this conversation came in during COVID or when folks are going remote is, what does that look like? And how do we give feedback in the moment in a way that impacts behavior? So, that purpose of that performance appraisal process really is it's a feedback mechanism. And it's a feedback mechanism for the individuals to hit their highest potential and for the organization to hit those business outcomes.
When I've had performance reviews, not always, but sometimes I felt like the manager sat down the afternoon before, right before leaving, and scratched it together, and then we did it the next day.
Right.
I'm guessing we'll cover ways.
It's a checklist item, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm guessing we'll cover ways that we can prevent that from happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, so let's talk about that for a second, right? And there's so many ways to gather feedback. And one of the best ways to do it is to have the individual do a self-appraisal. And we love to use that same form or that same format that the manager is using that the employee uses. So that we're both answering the same questions. We're looking at the same criteria. The employee is saying, hey, this is what I believe. The manager is saying, hey, this is what I believe. And we can see if there is alignment. If there's not alignment, we've got a bigger issue. And it's a communication issue between the manager and the employee, which of course is going to derail performance if those two things aren't aligned.
So how do leaders kind of create conditions for best contributions?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the ways that leaders really create that container for employees to be successful is that they're on the same page as to what winning looks like. They're on the same page as to what those key priorities are. And, we've talked a lot about goal setting, over the course of this team retention series and, how to set SMARTY goals and how to cascade goals from the organizational level to the team level to the individual level. And so when those things are on the same page and we're having those conversations consistently, we're more likely to be aligned on what is important. One of the things that, I do a lot with managers managing virtual team members is, hey, if you feel that there's something that's not aligned, I love to say, hey, Chad, what are your top 3 priorities? Throw it in the chat. Don't hit send yet. I'm going to put what I believe your top 3 priorities are too. And we're going to hit send at the same time, right? Again, we're saying, are we in alignment? If we're not, we know that there's a communication error, and that communication error is going to lead to, a disengagement in the work that we're actually doing. So much of performance goes back to alignment and communication that's there, because if we feel like we're winning and we know what winning looks like and we celebrate that, we're much more likely to get addicted to that winning and want to keep doing it.
So I'm guessing, a good, healthy communication process makes accountability seem a little bit less painful for the person that's being held accountable. It's more like a constant flow rather than like a nagging or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that constant flow, and it's also really looking at this and saying, hey, am I aligned or am I not? There's a tool that we use called the accountability dial, and there's a book around that we can throw into the show notes within that. But, there's really kind of 5 steps within that accountability dial process. And, it's the mention, so if, essentially, if we notice something, hey, Chad, you look a little tired today. Everything okay? We're mentioning what that is, right? Mm-hmm. And then we're going to go into exploring that a little bit further. So then, that 3rd step is, we're going to have that one-on-one conversation, right? Where we're really going to start to get, hey, what is the impact of what you're doing, so that there's an understanding of what the impact is. And these are all, conversational. There are questions. Here's the impact on what that is on our team. And then, yes, we absolutely get to the point where we need to set a boundary. And then we're essentially stating, are you going to become a happy alumni or not, right? So within this kind of accountability dial process, what we're doing is we're starting to name where things are at. How this fits into performance management is that it's the ongoing communication that's happening in the moment. We're mentioning in the moment what we're noticing, both the amazing things and the things that are maybe not so great, like, Chad, I really appreciate how you're engaging with me in the conversation today, instead of just asking questions that feel like maybe disjointed, right? Like, that is a naming and bringing folks into a two-way conversation, because performance really is two-way.
So I'm guessing, we've talked about goal setting previously in this retention series. I'm guessing goal setting plays a part in the whole performance management process.
Absolutely, because goal setting is all about, what does winning look like, right? And giving individuals the opportunity to set their goals and guide them. Of course, it has to be aligned to what's in their job description. It has to be aligned to what the team and the organization need. But if we're presenting, here's our organizational goals, here's our team goals, what's a goal that you want to set that will help to support that also very specifically aligns with what that core job responsibility is for you. It gives them that enrollment into saying, yeah, I want to choose this because I'm not being told what to do. I'm being given the opportunity to help define what that is. And I'm going to own it more if I can create it.
I have had reviews. The first time I ever had a review, I was scared to death that I was going to hear some things for the first time that I had never heard before. And then the manager assured me that wouldn't happen. But I've had reviews, not from that same manager, where that has happened. Has that kind of evolved over time, this performance management review, this once a year surprise review?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, does that still happen in some organizations? Sure, it sure does, right? And the other thing with only doing an annual review is, guess what? Managers turn over. Managers change. Now, all of a sudden, you've got a new person coming in that may be brand new to the organization and or brand new to you, that has no idea what has happened of 9 out of those 12 months. And so then we get into all of these biases of recency bias, and we're only, rating on the last 3 months when the review is supposed to be on the last year, right? And so within that, it's really giving that feedback in the moment, and then ensuring that we have some sort of documentation within that, so that we do almost have like these snapshots once a month, where we got a 12-month snapshot of what that is, both for the employee and for the individual that's there. And this doesn't have to be hard or cumbersome or anything else, right? These can be really easy one-on-one conversations that, there's a quick survey ahead of time within it of, how do you think you're doing, on a scale of 1 to 10? What were your goals from last month? Did you hit them on a scale of 1 to 10? What will your goals be the next month, right? So when we create these very goal-based and have then the feedback loops aligned into it, it allows us to have those snapshots.
So it's almost like a summary of more regular meetings, rather than just like a dropping or dumping a whole year's worth of stuff on you at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And then here's the deal. If we do a performance evaluation today, Chad, and this is August 22nd, right? Mm-hmm. And you say, hey, Traci, we really had a huge issue last November. And so that's, lowering your rating by 2 points or whatever. I'm going to go, okay, I don't even remember that. I don't have any ability to make a change on that. And is it still relevant? And if that's not still relevant, then why are we bringing it up, 10 months later? Because what's that going to do? That's going to have me become disengaged and go, well, if you're bringing up these negative things from 10 months ago that we've corrected and we've improved upon and we've done all the things with, but yet we didn't talk about then, or maybe it's still happening, but it was never brought up, am I going to want to get engaged in what's going on? The answer is probably not.
Sure. So let's say we meet monthly. What does a typical kind of monthly meeting look like? One-on-one monthly meeting?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things we like to do within these monthly meetings is, hey, we pull in predictive index. So there is a management strategy guide inside of predictive index, which really looks at, hey, what do I need from my leader for me to be successful? And so this allows that conversation to truly be a two-way conversation, because the manager is going to do a self-reflection on that, saying, hey, how am I leading Traci the way Traci needs to be led? And I'm also going to look at that and say, okay, what do I need to hit my top performance? Guess what? It is my responsibility, and it is also a joint responsibility. If there's something where I'm not hitting a goal, what are the reasons behind that? So often it's like, oh, that employee is just bad. Well, what does that employee need? So when we can look at that relationship between the manager and the employee and have that a part of the conversation, we're building the relationship, and we're also starting to unblock those items that create the disengagement and create the performance. So that's one item within that. We're looking at goals and that goal setting that is aligned to what the business needs and what's needed specifically in that job. One note that I want to make here, just because an employee says that they want XYZ goal, it is the manager's responsibility to say that goal is not aligned with what this job is or what the organization or the team needs. And that's a really important piece, because so often we have folks that are focused on the wrong things, that think they're doing the right thing, and then they're surprised and going, well, what do you mean my performance wasn't there? I did all these things. And the manager's like, yeah, but that wasn't the priority. And they're like, well, why didn't you tell me that? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that key piece there of prioritization. Are we working on the right things? Do I have what I need from my leader to be successful? And am I requesting something different if I don't have it? And then the feedback of, here's what's going really well. Here's what we're hitting as the outcomes. At the end of the day, did we hit the outcomes that are important? None of the rest of it matters if we don't hit what the goals are. So we have to know, what is it that we're looking to hit? Otherwise, we can get lost in so much minutia and time wasting.
So, there would be 12 monthly meetings throughout the year, but every 3 months is kind of like the quarter. Is it important to have kind of quarterly meetings, or designate those as quarterly meetings? And how would that differ from monthly meetings?
Yeah, absolutely. So really kind of how we see this is the monthly meetings are much more conversational, where, hey, you know what, we're doing our feedback. We're really aligning on, here's the things that are most important. When we look at the quarter, a lot of times, we've got the P&Ls that are coming out. We have the key metrics that are coming out that come out quarterly. If you have quarterly board reports that you're providing, when we can tie it to some of those, we can get much more granular within that. And there's project things as well, right? So it might be quarterly, or it may be, hey, we just finished this project. How do we do in comparison to, what the intention and what was promised ahead of time? So the quarterly end up being a little bit more specific to the metrics, not that the others aren't, but the quarterly, we can really get in and say, all right, here's the metrics that we're specifically looking at. Are we aligned to those or not? And if, your organization uses something like the entrepreneurial operating system or a system like 90, all of that's already going to be in there, and you already have that data, and you're just pulling it up and looking at it.
So I've had, recently my boss, my supervisor, whatever you want to call it, asked me, what can I do to make your job easier? And I couldn't think of anything. But I've had other bosses that I wish they would have asked me that, and I could have probably told them like 15 million things.
Right.
Is performance the responsibility of the manager, the employee, or somebody else?
Yeah, so it's a joint responsibility, right? Because if we look at accountability, if the manager is not holding individuals accountable to what needs to be done, we're lowering the bar on what the expectations are. There's also peer accountability within a team, and there is that responsibility of, essentially naming, hey, I'm not getting what I need, or I really appreciate Sarah for X, Y, and Z, because it allowed me to do these key pieces within my job. And of course, we're all responsible for our own performance. And within that responsibility for our performance, many times it is asking very specifically for what we need. Now, I will name when we ask folks, hey, what do you need? They're like, I don't know, right? And so, the way that those things are asked also becomes really important into when we're having some of those accountability conversations around, hey, where are we at with this specific item? Okay, it's not done. Okay, what? Tell me about it. What's blocking you from completing this specific task? So let's say it's, prospect outreach. Well, I don't know what to say. Okay, so we could role play that. So it may be an experiential thing, right? So there's 100 different reasons why, but when we can get specific, we can come up with specific answers for what that individual needs to be successful. And so the key that we see is the specificity in the specific circumstances. So we can pull up, hey, you know what? There was a shipment that was sent out incorrectly last week. Let's do a debrief on what exactly happened there in that process to determine where did this go wrong? Now we're identifying what key pieces were missing that individual needed. Was it training? Was it that we had an oversight because there was a temp in that day versus, our normal employee? Like, what are those things? When we can look at it in a specific example and scenario, we're much more likely to figure out what that individual needs and then create that across the job.
You talked a little bit about the importance of documentation, maybe in these regular meetings. As an employee, I could see how that would be very important, especially for the year in review or the review meeting. Then we can have all these things that we talked about over the course of the year documented, and it's no problem. But in the moment when the documentation is happening, sometimes it can feel kind of like derailing or whatever. What have you seen that works with the team relating to documentation that supports everything?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the key things that we love to do, there's actually 3 that I'm going to outline here. We may have talked about this before in a previous conversation. But one of those is ensure we have agendas. What is the agenda for our meetings, right? So if you use Outlook or Google or whatever you use in your meeting in your meeting invites, actually have an agenda and list. Here's what we're going to talk about. Because then it's really clear that meeting happened, that you're both at that meeting, and here was the agenda items. And then, we use Outlook. So I like to do, a respond all to that meeting invite, essentially, that says, hey, here is what we talked about in this meeting. So if it's with a team, we're going to outline what we talked about, the outcomes we expect, and the team responsibilities within that. Again, we like to name accountability as how much of what by when. And that by when becomes really important because now we're getting clear on the specificity of what winning looks like within that. And so when we're working with individuals one-on-one and we're having conversations, this doesn't need to be the monthly one-on-one. This could just be, hey, you and I are going to meet. We're going to chat about, a receiving error that happened in the warehouse, or we're going to chat very specifically about, a missed sales opportunity, whatever it is we're going to follow up with that and say, hey, Chad, thank you so much for the conversation today. Here's the key takeaways that I heard. Chad, do X by when, do Y by when. And I like to keep these to only 3. Why? Because otherwise it feels like a laundry list that we can't actually accomplish. So, we want to keep this specific, but also, what am I promising you, right? So I may say that, we're going to meet on a weekly basis, and I'm going to take a look at the emails that you're going to send out ahead of time through this process while you create the templates, whatever that is, right? So then I'm going to close that email out by saying, please respond back and let me know if what I heard is the same thing you heard. Remember the agreement? Are we in alignment? But what that also does is that gives us the written documentation that we had the conversation, that you're committing to what those 3 things are and what I'm committing to. And then we're going to, essentially keep that email chain because that's going to allow us to have clarity in the expectations of performance and those outcomes. So accountability.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so accountability there is key, and we're building that in so anyone can look back on it and say, okay, what's here? Or that still wasn't very clear. No wonder they missed that, right?
Should the employee be encouraged to check that email chain or that documentation regularly?
Um, Well, typically when emails come in, you respond to them, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
it's one of those where it becomes a conversation, and
Okay.
and I think that that's key is that accountability becomes a conversation that we all expect that this is the expectation, and that if it's not done, the team also is going to go, I'm not going to put up with this because that has an impact on me, and then I can't do my job, right? And
Sure.
so, so often we use, a predictive index specifically with teams called design, where we're looking at, hey, what's the design of this team as to the strategy that we're specifically executing within our team? And ensuring that we've got those agreements that are made between team members, and that helps to increase that accountability as well.
So we've kind of talked about these throughout the conversation today, but what do you see as key components of a great performance management process?
Yeah, the first one is clearly defined goals and clearly defined job, right? And I mean, we can't get 100% here, but we know what those key items are, and that we're both in agreement on specifically what that is. And if it becomes that we feel that there's some disagreement, that we bring that back up. So that's one key piece of it, that we're really holding each other accountable for how we need to work, What does the manager need for the manager to be successful? What does the employee need for the employee to be successful? And we're really working through that together, where we're building trust in the relationship with our leader and with our team. That there's clarity in the expectations of the team outcomes and the individual outcomes that align specifically to the organization. And that we also are, encouraging and creating those goals where the individual has that specific enrollment and buy-in in it, and it's specifically aligned to the current priorities.
You have something you call a performance feedback loop. Can you just give me a brief definition of what that is again?
Yeah, absolutely. So the email example I just gave is a great
Mhm.
example of a performance feedback loop. Those one-on-one conversations, and, typically there's a quick form that we have folks fill out before that meeting so we can kind of take a look at it. You said something at the beginning of the conversation, which was, hey, the manager wrote my annual performance review 5 minutes beforehand and kind of threw it out there because it was a checklist item versus here's a structure to support your relationship. And that's a mindset shift of, this is really a structure to support the relationship so that we can both win within it. And I'll tell you, over my career and working with clients, I've had situations where we've done, the self, I'm going to rate myself, and that gets sent in, and we've shared that with managers ahead of time. They literally took that verbatim and made that theirs. And, the issue with that is the employee is like, you literally just took everything I did and said that this was yours. Now, I feel like you spent no time giving me any feedback. This is the only time a year I get feedback. And you just took mine and gave it back to me. And, that was one of those where it completely eroded the trust with that leader. And it also really created really difficult conversations going forward. And guess what? Many times when we rate ourselves, those are inflated. So it created issues throughout the organization because we weren't in alignment and calibrated across the organization. And so, one of those key items within, a great performance management process is if we're using ratings, that all of our managers are trained on what those ratings are, what they mean, that, if an outstanding performer, my definition of that in one department is the same as your definition of that in another, because it typically impacts merit increases, it can impact promotion opportunities. So we do want to ensure that, we're removing any bias and that we're aligned on what those specific items actually mean.
So how, I've been encouraged when doing my own rating, right before a performance review to just give myself the highest possible marks. Is that bad advice?
Yeah, for sure. Because there's a huge piece of self-awareness here, right? Like none of us are great at everything. And if we're going to always give ourselves the highest marks, we're not being honest with ourselves as to what are some of those areas that we need to work on and not. And if we're not honest on that, we then can't really collaborate with our team on what's specifically needed. And this is one of the reasons why we love predictive index here, because we can look at this and say, okay, so I'm very entrepreneurial, I'm task focused. I'm definitely people focused. I love to talk and be in the room, and I'm a change agent. I can see those things that need to change or that are specifically needed, and provide some of that direction. What I'm not great at is, getting into the nitty-gritty of the details for a long period of time. I'm not great at implementing that change that I might see that needs to be implemented over, getting that to, across the finish line 100% of the time. So if I say that all those things are strengths, I'm setting myself and my team up to fail. Versus if we can say, hey, you know what? That, implementation of those things isn't necessarily a strength. However, working with Chad and, Kara and Sabrina were able to implement these things because Chad's great at implementing it and I'm great at naming what it is and giving the vision behind it. Now we can align those things together. So is performance individual? Yes, but it can't be done in a vacuum because we do need to look at the global of what's happening with our team and what's happening with our leader without that being a scapegoat of blame, if that, to kind of tie that whole thing together. Sure. So it is one of those where it's really important that we're, honest in what our evaluation is. And this gets back to, am I on the right team? Do I have a leader that leads me the way that I need to be led? And am I truly in the right job? If I'm in a job that is critically detail-oriented and process-oriented, I'm going to fail.
So performance management and accountability, any final insights as we kind of wrap things up here today?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's about the relationship. So you think about your team and you look at that team and you go, do we have our team aligned to truly, blow their own minds and what they can accomplish? And that is aligned with what the organization is doing. If we're not doing that, then we really need to take a step back and look at how have we designed our processes in our teams in order for individuals to truly be successful.
Okay. Hey, Traci, great to talk to you as always. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You as well. So long, everybody.
Thank you so much for listening today. I'd love to connect with you. If you'd like to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn at Traci, Traci Austin, and at our website at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. If you'd love to learn more about our process, please reach out to us. And again, thank you so much for listening and sharing your feedback with us through a review. Have a fantastic day.